everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are talking about my DNFs from 2024. I wanted to do this instead of a worst books of the year because most of the time I just DNF books if I'm not really liking them. So it's hard for me to make a worst books of the year because honestly it would just end up being like the most mediocre books of the year, because if I feel like a book is going to be less than 3 stars, I just DNF it. And I don't feel like most mediocre books of the year would be a really interesting video. So I'm not doing like a worst books of the year, but I thought I'd tell you a little bit about some of the books that I DNF'd this year. This is maybe not a complete list because this year I haven't really been tracking my DNFs as closely as I have in some previous years, so I might be missing a couple here and there, but this is most of them at least. But yeah, let's just get into it. I'm just gonna go roughly in the order that I read them or DNF'd them. So first up we have Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. My main complaints about this, one, the main character definitely was giving off some not like other girls vibes. Maybe not as strong as I have seen in some other books, but it was still kind of annoying. But my main issue was the characterization felt so flat and empty, and it just got worse and worse somehow as the story went on, which you would think that it would at least continuing to experience these characters would add depth to them, but no, somehow they got more flat and more nothing as the story continued. Also, I remember that there were some comments, of course it's been a year since I've read this, but I do remember there were some things about this that I felt were maybe fat phobic, and it seemed like a lot of the characterization, especially for bad characters, were well, he's fat, so that's how you know he's a bad person. So again, it's been a year since I read this, so I am just kind of going off my notes on that, so I don't have a lot of specificity around it, but that is one of the things that I had noted while I was reading this, that maybe not a big fan. So this was my first DNF of the year. Next up, I actually did finish this book, but I'm going to include it in DNFs because I initially DNF'd it, which was A Sweet Sting of Salt by Rose Sutherland. I ended up finishing this and I was like, really, I should have just left it a DNF because that didn't do me any favors to finish it. I just found this so boring, and the two main characters had no chemistry with each other, even though it's supposed to be a sapphic romance. And the main character was so stupid. She it was so annoying. She drove me crazy because she kept doing the stupidest things, and that just made trouble for herself, put other people in danger. She was so annoying. So DNF'd this and then read it and then regretted finishing it. Next, I DNF'd Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay. I've tried to read this book multiple times, and honestly I never get more than 10 pages into it. I don't know why, but I cannot for the life of me care about this book. And I swear, I usually have a lot of patience for fantasy books. I have a lot of just, patience for going with it on things, and letting them, giving them a good 50 to 100 pages, let things unfold. Sometimes it takes a while for fantasy to get going. I couldn't even do that with this because I just was nodding off and glazing over as I was reading it. I'm thinking maybe his writing just doesn't really work for me. I'm going to give another book from him a shot, but he's an author that I feel like I should like because he writes historical fantasy, and people always rave about his characterization and his beautiful writing and all of this, and I'm like, this all sounds like something I should love, and yet I have tried to read this book so many times and every time I just glaze over, but hopefully another book from him will work for me. We'll see. Okay, I had to take a quick break because somebody called me. But next up for DNFs, I DNF'd A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross, which was kind of an unintentional DNF because I just forgot that I was reading it, and then at a certain point I remembered it and was like, oh, I guess I don't care about this anymore. So I decided to DNF it. There were some things that I liked about it. I liked the atmosphere of it. I liked that the magic was related to all these different creative things like music and weaving and all of that. But I just felt like there was a lot missing from it. I think that it was it felt very like telling, not showing. There was a lot of stuff that just felt like it was going like, it all makes sense, trust me, just believe me. Which, like, no, you have to actually like show me things in order for me to believe you that any of this makes sense. I think the relationships, a lot of them moved very quickly, and especially the romantic relationship that was happening in it, it felt like they were trying to use the fact that they had known each other as children as like a shortcut to kind of jump over a lot of relationship building and development that I think was still necessary. So it felt like the relationship was kind of based on nothing and was moving too quickly. There were other relationships and dynamics that I think just moved too quickly as well, and characters were like, I suddenly have very strong feelings about this person, when for like based on absolutely nothing. I think also one of the things that continually frustrated me was that the main character that we're following is supposed to have this very like complicated relationship with the island that he came from and the people on the island and like that community, and he felt very like isolated and shunned and like all of this, but it is so telling and not showing. It really, I don't know, it just tells us about this, how he felt, but we never really see him. I don't know how to explain, like I think that we needed some more like flashbacks to see these experiences, to really feel the impact, or to see how maybe he was misinterpreting those interactions with people. I needed to see more of like how these were affecting his relationships with people in his adult life, instead of just it telling us like he has a lot of feelings about this. So it just felt a lot of like the book just going, just trust me, it's there. And I was just like, I don't. The pacing of it also, I was kind of bored while I was reading it. I just felt like what was happening in the main character's like story, his romantic relationship that was building, and then the actual like plot line that was going on, in terms of, I think there were like people being kidnapped, felt kind of like they were mismatched in the pacing of those pieces of the story. So overall, I just felt very disengaged from it, so I guess I just forgot about it. Next up is truly the worst thing that I read this entire year, which was Daggerspell by Catherine Kerr. I was very disappointed that this was so terrible because it is a fantasy that is set in this kind of like Irish inspired fantasy world. I've seen it recommended for like fans of Seven Waters, also loved this, and it's the beginning of a very long fantasy series. I was like, ooh, maybe I can like get another like long series to really sink my teeth into. I also was buddy reading this with Kara from Wild Book Garden, and oh my god, we both ended up hating this. This was absolutely horrible. So first of all, this book is about like reincarnation of these, I don't know if it's like 5 characters or something, maybe 6 characters, who are all kind of bound together by this curse. And so each incarnation, they all find each other again in this next life, and then hopefully, I guess, they will grow over time and be able to end this curse. But this is a book that I was like, truly not a single thing about this book was good or done well or even competently. Every aspect of this was absolutely horrible. The writing in this, terrible. Plotting, terrible. Pacing, terrible. World building, terrible. Like everything, characterization, character relationships and development, themes, all of it awful. Not a single thing was good about this. This has definitely like content warnings for all kinds of stuff, but especially like incest, because that's the main plot line in this. That's what kind of sets this whole thing off in the first storyline. And then of course that comes back around in later incarnations, because those two like people are reincarnated as family members again. In the first incarnation they're brother and sister, later on it's father and daughter. And my biggest issue with this is just how horribly it is written, because I am not saying that like more complicated or difficult or heavy topics should never be included in books, but if you're going to include them, you have to do it well and with a degree of sensitivity and finesse and just like competence. And this book didn't have any of those things. And so I really think she should not have tackled as sensitive a topic as incest. Also, as I was reading this, I literally couldn't tell any of the characters apart, which both of us, we were having trouble being like, can you tell who any of these characters are? No, the characterization was so poor, so shallow. All of the character perspectives sounded the same, so it was impossible to tell any of them apart. This is the type of writing that has so many words and yet says absolutely nothing with them. So it's just so pointless to read. And then also the structure of this book was so bad. As we were reading it, I was just coming up with a whole new structure for like, okay, if you were going to tell this like terrible story, here's how you could structure it to actually make it maybe interesting and engaging and like help draw the reader in and all of this. I was like rewriting this book in my head, and it would have been, there's so many things that I feel like would have been easy to do to make this better, and yet they didn't do. And it baffles me that this is part of such a long series. There are like 14 or 16 books in this series. It's wild to me that this book got published, let alone someone kept going with the series. After that, my next DNF was The Book Charmer by Karen Hawkins. This one was mostly because it was just so boring. I read this because I was in the mood for something like a Sarah Addison Allen book, and this kind of promised to be in that vein of like small southern town with a little bit of magic, but it was just so boring. Nothing happened, and it just felt like it was going nowhere. There was not enough magic in it. Like, there is a family that has magic, and yet we learn so little about this. And I think like, how far into this book did I get? Hold on a second. Yeah, I got at least like 50% of the way into this book. It was not like vibey and atmospheric the way that I would have wanted it to be. It wasn't witchy. The conversations that happen in this book were so meandering and repetitive that they were so frustrating to read, because I just was like, maybe the way they talk is more realistic, because real people do talk in circles sometimes. Our conversations can be meandering, but oh my God, it was annoying to read. Also, this book like info dumps, and I'm like, this is contemporary. It is set in a small southern town. You don't need to do world building. Why are you info dumping? What I wanted was like a little bit of magic, atmospheric, vibey, just having really likable characters that I could root for. Didn't do any of those things, and just was like, I'm out. Then I was sad about DNFing this one, but I DNF'd A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. This is one that I was really hoping to like, because it's kind of like garden gothic horror. It is following these two men who have this botanical garden, and well, one of them has this like elaborate botanical garden in a greenhouse. One of them is a taxidermist, and then they decide to try and kind of create this almost like Frankenstein daughter using a fungus to kind of animate the body. And I think that it could have had some interesting parts to it. I think that it was trying to talk about, you know, life and death and morality of doing all of this, and was maybe kind of going in that like Frankenstein way of like responsibility of your creations and what are like the morality of creating life and like all of this. And I think that could have been interesting, but I don't know, I just couldn't get into it. I didn't really care about any of the characters. I also was really hoping to like this because I've liked some other like gothic horror that's like specifically like fungus horror. So I was like, it's real niche, but I've liked a couple of books like that. So I was hoping that this would also kind of fit into that niche for me, but it just wasn't doing it for me. And I don't know, this is one that I could have finished, but I just feel like it would have ended up feeling like a slog to read it, but I was really disappointed that I DNF'd this one. Next, I DNF'd Wonders of the Invisible World by Christopher Barzak. I technically DNF'd this twice because I DNF'd it earlier in the year, and then I was like, no, I should give this another shot. And then I got 75% of the way in. I was so close to the end, and then just went, no, I can't do it. I just so much don't care about anything that's happening in this. I originally picked this up because it was recommended for fans of the Raven Cycle. I really do not understand that comparison. Like, maybe on the most surface level, there is a, you know, male-male romance between these two teen boys who are living in the South. There is a kind of like paranormal element of magic to it, but those are like very shallow aspects that it has in common with the Raven Cycle. I think comparing the two kind of misunderstands what people actually, or at least what I actually like about the Raven Cycle and what makes it special. This really lacked in having those like characters that you get really attached to. It didn't have the found family and the relationships that make it all so lovable. It didn't have the atmosphere to it. It was just so completely lacking in like emotional grip to me. And I didn't really care about the romantic relationship that was going on, even though I really wanted to. So I DNF'd this twice. After that, I DNF'd Scorpica by G.R. McAllister. I really didn't get far into this. And this one, I think that maybe I should have just known that I wasn't going to like it. I probably shouldn't have gotten this in the first place, because like the whole premise of this is that it's in this like matriarchal society where only women can rule, but then suddenly no girls are being born, and so they have to figure out why. And I think I should have just known that a story that kind of hinges on pregnancy and people's ability to get pregnant and all of that was just not going to be a book for me. So I think this is one that was just a bad choice on my part. Originally I was excited because I was like, ooh, it's a queendom. That sounds interesting. But I think maybe I should have just thought a little bit harder about this one. Then I DNF'd the audiobook for Small Favors by Aaron A. Craig. This one I DNF'd for a few reasons. One is that the kind of flavor of horror ended up being very much this like small isolated village that, you know, creepy things start happening and people start turning on each other. I have seen it compared to the movie The Village, which I have not seen, but I have seen trailers for, and I'm like, that feels like it would be a similar vibe, and that is not a vibe that I'm interested in. Also, there is a romantic subplot, which I just did not like. Now, I do think it's possible that maybe later we find out that the love interest is actually a bad guy and maybe we were supposed to dislike him. I don't know. That's not the vibe I was getting from it. But oh my God, every time he came on page, and especially when he was talking to the main character and they were having their like banter, I hated it so much. And everything he said, at one point I was like doing dishes while I was listening to it, and every time he spoke, I just made like an ick face. I was like, ugh. I just hated everything he said. It was so just ugh to me. And again, maybe that's part of the horror. Maybe he's supposed to be a bad guy and we were supposed to hate him and find him weird. I don't know, but I just did not want to read more about it. And the impression I got was that we were supposed to like him, but again, I have no idea. I didn't finish the book. Maybe there's a twist that I don't know about. But yeah, I just like had like a hard ick anytime he said literally anything. And that is why there's a lot of like romance and especially romantasy that I just can't read, because there's a certain type of banter that just gives me just intense ick and I cannot do it. And this was kind of like that. So that's why I DNF'd Small Favors. After that, I DNF'd Fires of the Faithful by Naomi Kritzer. So this sounded like it might be interesting. It has this magic system that is based on a religion slash based on music. So like religion and music are very intertwined, and that is kind of how they form their magic. And the main character that we're following is at a conservatory. There's also like hints of, you know, a conspiracy because there's like famine, and then we're finding out maybe there's like some nefarious things happening that are causing the famine. That all could have been interesting, and yet it wasn't. The writing in this was not necessarily like bad, but it was so rudimentary that it was just so boring. Our main character was so boring. She also didn't make decisions that made any sense. There are also other characters that would just do stuff and make decisions that made no sense. In this world, there is this conflict between like the old religion and the new religion, and the old religion is like persecuted. And there's essentially like an inquisition where there are people who will like come, and if they like suspect anybody of practicing the old religion, they will kill them as a spectacle. Like, it's a whole thing. And yet there are people she encounters who still practice the old religion and are trying to keep it alive. And when they meet her, somehow out of nowhere, they're like, we know you're one of us. You can like know all of our secrets, even though we just met you and know literally nothing about you. And it just was like, people are literally being murdered over this, and yet you're just like, you know what, random person that I just met 2 seconds ago and who's pretty much told me nothing about themselves, I can just tell, I can trust you, you know? Made no sense. Also, this whole like old religion versus new religion thing, there was so little world building. There's little to no world building around this. We just had this vague understanding that there is a old religion, which I'm pretty sure is just supposed to be Christianity, because it has like one God and their symbol is a cross. And then the new religion, like, we know nothing about the practices of either of them, the backgrounds of either of these religions. What is the contention between them? Like, why is there a conflict between them? What is the history of them? How did this like inquisition happen? We have little to no information about like either the practices and differences or the history and conflict between these two religions. And so they're just, it's incredibly vague. Also, I think that this was supposed to have a sapphic romance in it, but I mean, I got over halfway through and there was not. Like, there was a character that I think it was supposed to be hinted that something, that maybe they kind of had some feelings for each other, but there was not a sapphic romance in this, unless that character, I think there's a second book, maybe that character comes back in the second book, but like there was nothing in this first one. Then after that, I DNF'd The Oleander Sword by Tasha Suri. This one was kind of an accidental DNF again, because I had been listening to the audiobook, kind of forgot that I was listening to it, and then realized that I just was like, you know, I don't think I really care about this. And at the point when I realized I had forgotten about it, it was so many months later that I would have had to start the audiobook again from the beginning. And I wasn't gonna do that. I did not care enough to do that. And I'm always so disappointed when I don't like the books in this series, because for one thing, I liked Tasha Suri's other series, but also this has things in it that I feel like I should love, because it's supposed to have this like, you know, foresty magic, and I feel like I should love it, and yet I just never do. This is not one that I have a huge rant about, like it being terrible. It just never quite hooks me. I always want to love it and I just never quite do, and I just sort of forgot that I was reading this. So I think I need to accept that this is not a series for me, even though I want it to be. And then finally, the last book that I have that I DNF'd was The King's Peace by Jo Walton. Another one that I was kind of disappointed by. I thought that I might end up DNFing it, but I really wanted to love it. This is also an Arthurian retelling, which can be extremely hit or miss for me. I was interested in this because I think I had seen an article where it was talking about how Jo Walton read The Mists of Avalon and hated it, and then wrote this book as her own Arthurian retelling to be like, this is how it's done. And I just, one, that's hilarious to me, but as a fellow hater of The Mists of Avalon, I really just wanted to read her take on Arthurian retelling, because I was just like, yes, let's hate on The Mists of Avalon. That book is terrible. Anyways, that is what first got me interested in this. However, I knew that I might end up DNFing it because Arthurian retellings can be very hit or miss for me. Also, I have previously DNF'd another book from Jo Walton, so I wasn't sure if her books they might just not be for me. I think that I just don't really like her writing style. I also think that she tends to lean more in the direction of like having a lot of distance from her characters, which is not really a thing that I like. Like, that is not why I read books. I read books to feel close to these characters and understand their experiences, not to just like have this distance and be told what they're experiencing. So I think her writing wasn't really working for me. I wasn't really interested in any of the characters. I found the story kind of boring, but one of the things that also really kind of turned me off of this book was kind of a combination of things. So the book starts with a on-page essay scene when the main character's family is being attacked by raiders. Some of her family members are murdered. She is essayed and then like tied up and left for dead. Before they leave her, one of the attackers like dedicates her death to his god, who is a god that she does not worship. She doesn't know anything about, but she ends up surviving. And then she kind of goes on to join King Arthur's, he has a different name, but it's essentially King Arthur's court, and kind of become like maybe not a knight, but like one of his, like warriors. She then finds out that she is pregnant from the essay, and so she goes to kind of live in like a convent essentially to have the baby in seclusion, and then she can kind of just like leave the baby there and go back to her life. While she is there, she encounters, I think, like this version of Morgan Le Fay, who then sort of like magically attacks her, and then the god that she was dedicated to by the person who assaulted her to begin with, that god kind of comes and protects her and goes like, no, she's dedicated to me, so you can't have her, you can't attack her because I protect her now, because her life is mine. And there are a lot of like issues that I had with the way that these things were handled. I think that in general, I don't think that the essay was handled very well. I don't think it really dealt with the emotional aspect and emotional like repercussions and fallout from an experience like that. It really just brushed by it and was like, yeah, that was just sort of there as a plot device because she needed to like have this baby, so we don't really have to care about the emotional aspect of it, which I really hate it when books just kind of brush over that type of thing. I didn't really like some of the kind of undertones and like implications of some of the things around her pregnancy and having this child, but also the tone that it had. And again, I may be reading into this too much, but the tone that I was reading into this book when she is attacked by Morgan Le Fay's character and this other god protects her, the vibe to me was very like, wow, isn't she lucky that she was assaulted and left for dead, but she was dedicated to this god, so now he can protect her? How lucky. And it just was like, no, we're not doing this. So I wasn't liking this to begin with, but then there were just a lot of things around the way the essay was handled that I just was like, I'm not reading a whole book doing this. So this was DNF'd. All right, so those are all of the books that I DNF'd, or at least most of the books that I DNF'd in 2024. Those are the ones that I have documented, at least. But I would love to know if you also hated any of these books. I would love the solidarity if you also hated any of these. Or did you DNF any books this year? What is a book that you're like so glad that you DNF'd that book? I would love to know. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.